Welcome to the final installment of our interview series with Scott Heil of To Be Sure Substance Abuse Professionals. If you haven't seen the first 3 installments, you can check them out on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. Scott's going to wrap up the interview series by covering common employer landmines and psychologically healthy workplaces.
So we've talked a little bit about, substance dependency. You've said that word a few times, and we've talked about compliance and compliance monitoring. What's the difference between dependency and compliance?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because people tend to always think about, addiction and dependency. That's the catchy stuff. But really, when it comes to workplaces, compliance becomes what some folks who aren't dependent would be striving for, right? So not everybody. So even though folks might be abusing substances, does not mean they're dependent. Not only people who are dependent on substances are a risk for workplace safety. So,
right.
General folks that are working and might be struggling with separating these substances from the workplace might be just creating just as much risk for workplace safety and injuries and accidents as someone who's dependent. So, so generally thinking about providing treatment for folks who are dependent, but I would say, being more proactive, more preventative, having those opportunities and using them wisely to be able to kind of nip some things in the bud before they get carried away can really be helpful and for creating a safer and more productive environment as well in the workplace. So,
absolutely. So, what are some common employer landmines or things they may struggle with in terms of, say, like positive test management or the SAP kind of realm?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ones is just how they think about these areas, right? So do they take it seriously enough or not? But also, like you mentioned, so, positive test management. So it's, you and I have talked about this too. So what's common sometimes is people just retest till they're negative, but what that does is taking on a whole pile of liability should something happen. So does the employer want to take that risk?
Well, that doesn't really support the worker either, does it? Right? Like, it doesn't provide them with any education or support or resources to maybe make different decisions or to, handle, some potential misuse.
Right. It can be pretty daunting for employers to help employees if they just say, go get help on your own. Because there could be lots of barriers or potential things that might stop that process from happening. Right. So, some of the other things, I've witnessed with employers too, is they might just have some fear or some unknown about these areas. So they don't talk about these things. Right. So I had one HR professional from a pretty big prominent company say, we don't ask our employees about substance use, kind of the don't ask, don't tell type thing.
Yeah.
And I
Head
said,
in the sand.
yeah, head in the sand. And I said, so how does that kind of approach work generally for safety? Like think about all the stuff the Navy's going through these days with that kind of attitude, where things are kind of, pushed away and hidden and not looked at, not addressed, right? So if we want to have a safer environment, how do we get that without kind of opening conversations about that and openly talking about it, right? So those would be some of the landmines I would say that would be out there for employers.
Absolutely. Well, and some that I see as well are things like just straight up terminating the employee, right? Well, we've had a positive drug or alcohol test, so I'm sorry, we're terminating your employment. And, I try to coach companies that kind of quick to the punch approach really could put them at legal risk, right? Like human rights legislation is pretty specific that if an employer, has reason to believe or there's evidence that there may be a possible addiction. And I mean, if someone's using substances, the potential is there, right? They have a duty to inquire into the existence of a disability or an addiction. So just terminating somebody without proper assessment, I think really leaves them open to potential legal liability.
Yeah, this I should be interviewing you for these situations because I imagine you encounter them with employers all the time. I'll just give you another quick example that might illustrate for our viewers. So, I know some people at a pretty big construction company, and they had some issues with an employee who's struggling with substances, and so they just terminated him, like you said, and they took the risk that employee wouldn't lawyer up. He did.
Uh-huh.
So it's cost him, I think, $20,000 in legal fees now trying to get rid of this employee, where, an investment of $400 or $500, they could have done it legally,
Yeah.
or given the individual an opportunity to get help. Um, so there's a good
Absolutely.
example of kind of old school thinking in these ways, right? So
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think, people who, especially I find HR people who maybe follow like human rights case law and things like that, there are some cases, and they are few and far between, but there are some cases where, an employee was terminated after a positive test, and that situation, after some, review, human rights actually upheld that termination as a legal termination. However, each of those cases is handled case by case, and there was a lot of other facts to that case that led to that conclusion. So I think for employers who maybe watch things like human rights case law or watch the news, they need to be cautious with just taking those at face value and thinking that they apply to them as well. So I think reaching out to a professional like yourself or like me to have conversations about these situations, we can help provide some context and make sure that they're, following the law and doing the right thing.